This is an old story of chivalry and knighthood called Roland and Oliver of the Song of Roland fame. The city of Vienne is closely besieged, for Duke Gerard, its lord, is at feud with his sovereign, Charles, the great king of France. Fiercely have they quarrelled over a wager at chess, and Gerard must fly from the court to call around him his kinsmen and vassals. Now they bravely defend the walls round which lies the mighty host of Charles. The 12 peers of France are there: Archbishop Turpin, the wise Duke Naimes, Ganelon the traitor, Lambert of Bourges, Ogier the Dane, Richard of Normandy, and many another knight renowned in song and story. Great feats of arms are done on either side, but all the land grieves for this war between those that should be at peace. For 2 years the siege lasted, during which Charles remained before the city, unable to take it, and unwilling to retreat. The knights and squires were wont to pass much of their time in hunting and in the sports of chivalry. One day, Oliver, Duke Gerard's nephew, upon whose chin the beard was beginning to grow, had stolen forth from the city alone, without arms or signs of rank, and passing fearlessly through the king's men, essayed his skill among a band of youths playing at the quintain. All were astonished at the strength and grace of this young stranger, who far surpassed even Roland, the nephew of Charles, at the game which, hitherto, he had always borne away the prize. Suddenly there rose a murmur that this was one of the enemy who had found his way into the camp. "Seize him!" was the cry, and a score of mailed hands were laid on Oliver. He shook them off. He snatched up a tent stake and laid his assailants on the ground. He sprang upon a swift horse and flew towards the town. The king's men followed hard and fast, and young Roland rode foremost of them all. Already he was close upon the fugitive. He had raised his sword to strike when he heard a cry from the walls. He looked up, and there was the fair Alda, Oliver's sister, clasping her hands and raising her blue eyes to heaven as she saw her brother's danger. The arm of Roland dropped to his side. He reined his steed and let Oliver ride on unharmed. Those who beheld him thought he had been wounded by an arrow from the walls. The shaft had gone to his heart. Night and day Roland henceforth thought of the fair Alda, and no longer cared to prove his courage in assaults against the city of her kinsmen. There were times of truce, too, when the ladies of Vienne rode freely through the king's camp. Then the youth might feast his eyes on her beauty. The day came for him to be dubbed knight, and before ever he had dinted his bright shield, he sought speech of this lady and said, "I dare not ask of thee to accept me as thy knight, but I trust that all the deeds of my life will prove how there is none more faithful and devoted to thy service." "Ah, sir," replied the blushing maiden, "I wish well that we might be friends, but this may not be while thy house is at feud with mine." From that day Roland strove to win his uncle's mind to peace, and in likewise counselled Duke Naimes and the bravest of the peers. But Charles frowned, saying bitterly that he had expected other things from the new-made knight, and the false Ganelon whispered doubts and sneers, for Ganelon hated Roland ever since the young knight had disabled him in the first tourney. These whispers came to Roland's ears, making his blood burn to show himself worthy of his spurs and to shame the slanderers. Before long he had his wish. Now, arrayed in rich furs and goodly mantle, as beseemed a knight, came Oliver to the king's tent to treat for peace. Before all the barons and knights he told his errand, but the king's brow was stern as he answered, "Peace Duke Gerard shall not have, till he come with a saddle on his back to sue for it." "Nay, Lord King," answered Oliver, "he were unworthy to be a peer of France if he thus debased himself." "We have here the nephew in our hands," spoke the false-hearted Ganelon. "Let us hang him over against the gates, and thus teach the proud uncle to rebel against his king." The eyes of Roland shone with anger, and he felled the traitor to the earth. "It were shame to us," he cried, "if a messenger might not come and go freely and speak all his will." "I have done my errand," said Oliver. "If the king will remove his host and seek no more to harm us, Duke Gerard and all his men will henceforth serve him faithfully in all things. If not, ye know well how we can defend ourselves." The wise Duke Names whispered in his master's ear, counseling him to fair words that might end unworthy strife. But Charles sat silent with the cloud on his brow. Long had he stayed round this rebellious town, and he was loath to depart till it had yielded to his mercy, or till not a soul within it should be left alive. Then suddenly Oliver turned to Roland and cried, "Shall thy uncle and mine be ever at war? Say, young knight, wilt thou meet me and fight out this quarrel in single combat?" "Aye, that will I, for France and King," answered Roland eagerly. "So be it," said Charles, rising from his seat. "These two are of like age and strength, and it behooves them to win their spurs. Go back to the Duke, young sir, and offer him this covenant, that if thou be vanquished, he shall leave the town forthwith. But if my nephew fall, I will raise the siege, and let him live in peace." Willingly, all the peers raised their voices in assent, for they were wearied of the long war, and loved not to shed the blood of their countrymen. Thus it was agreed, and the combat was appointed to take place next day on a little island in the stream that rolled between the Duke's castle and the camp of the king. That night King Charles had a troubled dream. He dreamed that a falcon and a hawk fought fiercely together. But before he might know which overcame the other, he awoke, and could sleep no more. Anxious, he vowed a pilgrimage to Jerusalem if Roland should have the victory. Meanwhile, the fair Alda spent the night on her knees in the chapel of the castle. If Oliver were slain on the morrow, she would become a nun. And yet she could not pray that Roland might fall by his hands. As she did on her brother's armor, she wept, dreading both victory and defeat. Now the hour of the combat has come. The bank of the river was thronged with spectators. The besieged covered the walls, and high above it all sat the Lady Alda with eager eyes. Opposite stood the mailed host of the king. From either bank the young knights were rowed across and left together on the island. Oliver was equipped in rich arms a good Jew had given him when he was made knight. Roland had the famed sword Durendal, that could not be bent or broken, and the shield with its red and white quarterings the Saracen was to know so well. Courteously they saluted each other, and forthwith the fight began. Brightly shone their swords in the morning sun. Fiercely the young champions closed for life or death. Loud echoed the blows from the castle walls. The rivets flew from their armor. The splinters of steel fell into the river on either hand. All who beheld marveled to see such strokes, at each of which it seemed that one of the fighters might fall. Blood and sweat poured down their bodies. They panted for breath. They exhausted their strength, but neither would yield an inch. It was a good blade that Gerard's nephew had from the Jew, but no steel could withstand the matchless Durendal. At last Oliver's sword broke in his hand. He was forced to his knees. Already he almost felt the enemy's steel in his heart. He closed his eyes and thought of heaven, and his sister's despairing cry rang in his ears. But Roland flung away his weapon. "Rise," he said. "I am the nephew of the King of France. I slay not unarmed men." Oliver rose to his feet, and they faced each other with naked hands. They tore up 2 saplings, and with them struck mighty blows till these were broken. Then they locked their bodies together and wrestled like lions, till both at the same moment came to the ground. When they stood up breathless, the king saw them unlace their helmets and embrace. "Ha! Is my nephew tired of the fight?" he cried. And Ganelon whispered into his ear that Roland was betraying him for love of that lady on the castle walls. "Nay," said the wise Duke Names, "I will go through the fire, or fight a Saracen giant, if Roland be false." And so spoke all the peers of whose own hearts were loyal. In friendly converse the youths reposed throughout the noonday heat. Another sword was brought to Oliver from the castle, and a great gold flagon of wine, from which they both drank to the Lady Alda, and pledged each other. "Right glad I am," said Oliver, "to have to do with so good a man." "And sad I am," thought Roland, "to grieve so fair a lady." They aided each other to lace on their helmets, and with fresh strength renewed the battle. The hot sun went down toward the west, but still they fought on, and the 2 hosts watched them, now with hope, and now with fear. Again and again they paused to take breath, then crossed their swords once more. Would the day not see the end of this struggle? Now it was Roland who lowered the blade. "Hold," he said. "I am fevered and weak, and if it please thee, I would fain lie down and rest a time." "With all my heart," replied Oliver. "It were no honour to vanquish a knight through faintness. Rest and fear not. I myself will watch over thee." Roland undid his helmet and stretched himself on the earth. Then Oliver brought a great stone and put it beneath his head to give him ease, and fanned his face and fetched water in his own helmet. "Ah, he yields! He is overcome!" cried the king, and Alda had great pity of the fallen knight. But the king's nephew stood up and laughed. "Nay, I did but feign to try thy faith. I would fight on for days and nights if need were. But, courteous sir, since ye use me thus, I would right willingly call thee my brother. And if I live, I will marry no lady but thy fair sister. And if I live, she shall marry no man but thee," said Oliver. The sun went down as again they closed in desperate encounter. All that day had they fought with all their might, and neither could boast of victory. Again the good blades clashed, and the blows resounded over the water. The shades gathered round and hid them from sight. The anxious watchers could see but the sparks struck from helm and hauberk. At last the darkness came between them, and the sounds of strife ceased. They had fallen into each other's arms, and vowed lifelong friendship, since neither might prevail over the other as a foe. Roland undertook to make Gerard's peace with his uncle. Oliver promised him the hand of his sister. Henceforth, as brothers, they should share wealth and honor and love, and never again draw sword, unless it were fighting side by side. That night a great uproar arose in the camp. News had come that the Saracens were invading France. Gladly now both king and duke heard their nephew's entreaty for peace, and willingly they agreed to turn their arms against the infidel. The reconciliation was sealed by Roland's betrothal to Alda. All the land rejoiced that this long strife should thus be brought to an end, and with high hearts and the united host marched to that great war which Charles and his 12 peers won such renown. But in friendship and war none were more renowned than Roland and Oliver, who lived together henceforth as brothers, and died together on the field of Roncesvalles.